Joining us now is Aisha Morrell Ferguson. She is the Chief Development Officer for COTS, joining us on the MegaCast. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for being with us. So first, tell us about COTS. Tell us the organization's mission and some of the ways that it benefits people in our community here in Michigan.
Absolutely. So COTS has been in the city of Detroit now for 40 years. We're excited. This is our 40th anniversary, and we're happy to celebrate just being in the community, part of the community, providing services to families and individuals that have experienced homelessness. Our mission is to create and to facilitate opportunities for families in poverty that would help them to thrive and to succeed in building stronger households, neighborhoods, and communities. We've provided emergency shelter, affordable housing, supportive housing to families for years. And we now also provide something by way of our theory of change, our framework, passport to self-sufficiency, which I'll have a chance to talk about, I'm sure, here in a bit. But on a day-to-day basis, we're providing housing and support to nearly 1,000 people daily, and 60% of them are children. Our programs are just very broad and provide support and assistance where those may have been challenged with addiction or disability or illness, and even just in general with trying to maintain and obtain affordable housing, which is a big issue here in Detroit.
So where did COTS begin? What's the history and the background of this organization from its onset? Because homelessness is not unique just to the city of Detroit. It's unique. It's something that's common in all major cities in the United States of America, and it's an issue that's tackled by different means everywhere. So how did COTS begin in Detroit?
So COTS was started as a coalition. It was a group of organizations and individuals in the city that came together that realized that there was a problem with homeless men. It was an increasing problem with homeless men, and the problem being that there wasn't enough housing and support to help them overcome the challenge of homelessness. And so this coalition came together and ultimately created COTS, which was entitled the Coalition on Temporary Shelter, and that was back in 1982. Over the course of time, the organization became its own entity and stood on its own and was no longer part of that coalition. And so our name became a bit of a misnomer. And so we were kind of stepping away from that coalition on temporary shelter because for years, the focus was trying to find housing. So moving people from a place of homelessness into a place of housing. Well, that's still a Band-Aid to a much bigger, broader issue. Over the course of time, we saw an increase in homelessness among women and then homelessness among families. And so what started initially as what was seen as a problem among adult men quickly became a problem for a very broad and wide audience of people. And so we began shifting our services. So at some point we realized that there's a lot of service providers. COTS is not the only agency supporting those that have experienced homelessness in the city. And so there's a variety of amazing agencies that do this work and collaborate together to actually provide these solutions. But we noticed that there was a gap among family support. And so we reached out to our peers in the industry and said, look, if we shift our services to supporting families and really having an intentional focus on helping families that are challenged with homelessness, will you carry the load and carry the burden among single men, single women, things of that nature? And they said absolutely, and they supported us 100%. So in 2015, our focus became on families, or really lasered in on families and helping families that have experienced homelessness.
And how much more critical has the need for these sort of services that COTS provides to these families been over the course of the pandemic, especially earlier on where there was such a financial toll on the average family, and especially those that were struggling families that may not have been in jobs that were considered quote unquote essential or jobs that were maintained by the businesses that they worked for. They may have experienced job loss. They may have experienced significant financial issues on top of what may have already been in place in their life, and that caused a major uptick in people either losing their homes or being up for potential eviction before those moratoriums came into place. So how much greater of a need did there become for these services during the pandemic, and how did COTS adjust to that need?
So COTS had to adjust just like a lot of people did. We've been using the word pivot so frequently. And what's funny, we have an internal joke. We don't like the word, but we've learned to pivot so well that it's just become part of our narrative day to day. But the families that we've collaborated with, one of the things that we saw was not necessarily at the onset of the pandemic, but is actually happening now. There was such an outpouring of support. Our community, and when I say community, I'm talking like a vast majority of people really rose to the occasion and poured out just an abundance of support. Our foundations shifted how they fund, how they where they focus. Many of them kind of eliminated or either paused their general focus areas to really pour in support in COVID relief. And so there was a lot of relief that came into our agency and into many other agencies to really support families throughout the pandemic. And then on top of that, as you mentioned, the moratorium was a really, really big deal. The challenge is that now that that's expired, we're seeing a surge now that's impacting families even more so than the onset of the pandemic. We're seeing an astronomical rise in food costs. We're seeing astronomical rises in rent costs. In some spaces, in some cities, upwards of 20 to 30%, which is a really, really big deal. And so there is a great need still for support, for advocacy, and just for voices to share the concerns around this so that families can understand that they're not alone and that there are people, there are organizations, there are companies, there are community members, there are government entities that really are concerned about the well-being and the stability of families over a long-term period of time. But in general, you know, and I can talk about our Passport to Self-Sufficiency framework, which I believe has really been a benefit to helping families to find balance amid the pandemic.
Yeah, let's talk about the Passport to Self-Sufficiency, because for those that are experiencing homelessness or have experienced homelessness and have been provided a service like the services that are provided by COTS or by other organizations, that's great. It gets them off the streets. It helps them get off the street. Helps them get off, get out of the shelter. It helps them into their own home. But then you have then you have the new situation, which is then you have to work. They need to work to prevent themselves from going back to that position. And so often, what can happen is when those support systems are no longer there, giving them that constant support, it can be quite easy for circumstances around them, like you said, the rising cost of living, rising costs of food, to then draw them back into these situations. And that's why there is the Passport to Self-Sufficiency. Can you tell us about that and kind of the pillars of that program to then help those that are being assisted out of their homelessness situation remain out of that homelessness situation?
Thank you. I sure will. So the Passport to Self-Sufficiency came about because we had the realization that poverty was the driver to homelessness. And so as I mentioned, we had to stop and actually take a hard look at ourselves. What are we doing well and what are we doing not so well? We knew that housing was our sweet spot. We could really find housing, help establish, resources and work to try to find means for families to get housed or become housed. Keeping them there was the biggest challenge. Because when you transition into housing, the circumstances that the family has experienced don't always change. You just added an additional expense or an additional challenge to that, which is for their benefit, but trying to maintain it becomes difficult if they don't have the proper supports, as you mentioned. And so this theory of change really helped us to engage families to develop their economic self-sufficiency in a stabilized environment. And then the intention is not just to have an impact on the parent or the head of household, but to also have an impact on the children that would ultimately break that cycle of poverty for that generation and beyond. We call it the Passport to Self-Sufficiency, or PTS. And ultimately, it focuses on 5 different domains. And those domains are housing and family stability, economic mobility and empowerment, health and well-being, education and career development, and education and job training, and then employment and career development. And we see that as a wheel. So like you've got this wheel, and if those are the 5 spokes to the wheel, if any one of those 5 spokes is fractured, then the wheel is unstable. And it causes a challenge causes a poses a risk that would possibly cause a bigger challenge or a bigger problem for the family down the road. And so through this Passport to Self-Sufficiency framework, we commit to partnering with families through both mobility coaching and mentorship. And so both of those things we feel are critical to helping families to not only understand the importance of setting goals, but then to actually working to achieve those goals, checking them off and celebrating each achievement, and then continuing to make new goals as they go along. And that's not something that happens overnight. In years past, there were a variety of different programs, such as transitional housing programs, and we even operated some of those types of programs. But they would be given in like a 12-month to 24-month time frame, and that's not enough time for people to really establish the habits and the patterns in goal setting that would help them in a long-term fashion. And so we've determined that the Passport to Self-Sufficiency really does require a long-term partnership. And so we commit to that partnership, and it's usually between 3 to 5 years. And the successes and the outcomes that we're seeing are just outstanding. Families are accomplishing goals as simple as maybe obtaining their vital records, their licenses, or other documents that they need to be able to obtain employment, as well as longer term or broader goals, such as an associate's degree, a high school diploma, associate's degree, or even going on to college.
We're joined by Aisha Morrell Ferguson, the Chief Development Officer of COTS, joining us on the MegaCast. More information at cotsdetroit.org. And so on top of the website, I understand that you have multiple locations in the city where people can visit your organization if they're in need of these services or if they want to get involved. Where are these locations? And if people do want to get involved or are in need of these services, how can they go about participating?
So we do have emergency shelter, and that is over on Wyoming. It's near 6 Mile in Wyoming. That's where we are. And we also have affordable housing entities. We have a brand new apartment community that we've completed here in Midtown Detroit called Peterborough Arms. And we have another affordable community over on Wyoming called Bursmeyer Manor. The best way to learn about us is to give us a call. Visit us online for details about our programs and services, but give us a call. We can be reached at 313-831-3777. And we're happy to talk about how we can help, how we can support. And our services go beyond just, again, affordable housing and emergency shelter. If anybody needs support with coaching and mentorship, we're happy to provide those services over and above the housing as well. So by all means, we welcome calls.
Aisha, we got about another 90 seconds with you before we'll need to say goodbye. I want to give you an opportunity to also speak on volunteer efforts that are available or needed for your organization.
We always have a need for volunteerism. Now spring is coming up. We've got a lot of things that need to happen outdoors to just create an inviting and beautiful space at our shelter and our affordable housing communities. So we're going to be looking for volunteers here in the spring to help us with some outdoor projects. We always have opportunities internally to help us in administration. And then we have some sometimes family engaging activities as well, such as readings to our kids during story time. So anybody that's interested in volunteer opportunities, by all means, visit us online for more information.
And Aisha, just another minute or so with you before we'll say goodbye. Anything else that would be important for our audience to know about your organization or anything else we should be paying attention to from COTS going forward?
So I think that it's important for people to know that it really does take a village to build up community. You know, that there's the old proverb that says it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to really build up community. And we do not do this work alone. Partnership is critical. So any support, whether it's through volunteerism or monetary donations, is appreciated. Any partnership with other organizations that are in this space, we're happy to collaborate with you. And we believe that together we create opportunities to succeed.
Aisha, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.